Hey, DawgNation, this is Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us. Fun show coming up today. It is a great day for a Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All with Jeff Sintel, talking some UGA recruiting on the heels of two commitments coming up this past weekend. We're going to give away another Road to Atlanta t-shirt. I just realized as well I don't have the name for today's Road to Atlanta winner, but we'll still give one away from yesterday, so we'll make sure we take care of all of that. I apologize for the clerical error on that part, but we got plenty of Road to Atlanta t-shirts to give away. We're going to start the show with something really fun. I told you yesterday that we'll do a lot of recruiting on Monday just on the heels of two commitments, but there was a lot of good stuff from Mike Griffith at the Combine in Indianapolis, and we're going to get into some of that over the course of the week. Some of that for us begins today, including what really could be crucial in Georgia's pursuit of a national championship. I'll give you all the details on that as DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
All right, two quick confessions off the top of the program. You can decide for yourself how serious this is. I'll try to rectify both, but maybe one of them more needing of rectifying than the other. First confession, I told this to our video audience a moment ago. I forgot to draw the winner for the Road to Atlanta t-shirt yesterday, so we'll do that and make sure we give away two tomorrow. I apologize. Also, later on in today's program, we've got a different way we're going to give away Road to Atlanta t-shirt today. I'm trying not to make this too convoluted, but I also kind of want to make it as, democratic as possible, if that's the right word. I want as many people to be able to participate as we possibly can. So I'm trying to come up with different ways to give away the coveted Road to Atlanta t-shirt, which I do believe is the best-looking t-shirt we've made. And I also think it's a really important idea of solidifying ourselves behind the notion that Georgia's going to do more this season and get back to Atlanta in December and then go even further than it went a year ago. We think those Road to Atlanta t-shirts are a good way of kind of getting us all on the same page about that. So we'll give one away, and I apologize for the clerical error of not drawing the winner from yesterday, but we'll make sure we do that. The problem is when you leave stuff like this in my hands, there's always a chance it's going to go the wrong direction, and we've got another example of that. Here is the second, both confession and apology. I titled this show, if you want to look at whether you're watching on video or the podcast or whatever, it says, "The Possible Missing Piece in UGA's National Championship Pursuit." Now, I don't want to be guilty of over-promising and under-delivering, but the honest truth is that there's probably more than just one thing that's going to lead Georgia to a national championship in 2019 that indeed happens. One of the things we've talked about is the need for more deep throws down the field. We've done a lot of shows on that. We've even kind of whittled it down to kind of a statistical thing of, can Georgia find 4 more pass attempts per game, and can 2 of those go for completions deeper than 20 yards down the field? If so, we think that could be a missing piece for Georgia in the national championship. But that in itself alone's not going to be enough. The same way as today's thing alone's probably not enough, but it is a really important thing towards heading towards a national championship. And I wanted to start our show today by talking about that. And what's going to lead us into this is some really good reporting that our buddy Mike Griffith has done over the course of the past however many days in Indianapolis at the NFL Scouting Combine. Now, when anything like this happens, it was the same way when the Super Bowl was in Atlanta, and, you get a lot of these NFL reporters there, and NFL reporters are very, very distinguished, and they're very serious, and they're talking a lot about 40 times and shuttle runs, and, the NFL reporters just take their jobs very seriously, and so they're asking a lot of NFL-related questions, but there's always a gaggle of Georgia reporters who kind of want to know UGA-related stuff. So it's always this, give and take of, NFL guy asks NFL question, and then the Georgia guy is like, hey, what's Dan Lanning going to be like as the new defensive coordinator of Georgia? Well, now, half that room has no idea who Dan Lanning is because, they're too busy, watching the NFL Network all day long. But for the Georgia fan, what a guy like, say, Jonathan Ledbetter, who was at the Combine last week or the last few days, what a guy like that thinks about Dan Lanning is virtually more important than anything that could be said or done about the NFL draft. We hope to see Ledbetter go on and make a lot of money, but most of us care more about Georgia than we do about the NFL draft in the spring or what happens on Sundays in the fall. We are just college football fans. We don't really apologize for that. So with that in mind, Jonathan Ledbetter was asked, hey, what is Dan Lanning's defense going to look like for Georgia this season? And Ledbetter's answer, and you can see this from Mike Griffith at DawgNation.com. He's written a great piece about this. You can also catch up with this video at the DawgNation YouTube page. By the way, if you haven't subscribed to the DawgNation YouTube page, my encouragement will be to do just that. But Ledbetter goes into a pretty, thorough description of the defense under Dan Lanning, and it leads us back to the topic I wanted to start with today, the possible missing piece for Georgia in a national championship. Listen to Jonathan Ledbetter. And this is one of those loud rooms, so you can't hear perfectly everything that he says, but you do get a sense of what Ledbetter thinks Georgia has been missing, what Kirby Smart himself said about that, and where he thinks things should go under Dan Lanning. This is good stuff from Jonathan Ledbetter. Take a listen to this.
A lot of pressures. I think Georgia's going to continue to not necessarily take risks, but, get after it. We always got after it, but, we didn't generate a lot of sacks that we wanted to every year. And, I think that's something that he's working on, and just the scheme and how the defense is going. And the way Kirby wants it to look, because, towards the end of the year last year, Kirby was like, I want sacks. Y'all go get after it. Y'all go do what y'all do. And I'm definitely expecting, big things from my outside linebacker. There's a lot of talented guys, and definitely on the D-line, too. Everyone's athletic, and they can move.
Listen, that is why DawgNation is going to be live at things like the NFL Scouting Combine for quotes like that from Jonathan Ledbetter. That's as interesting as anything I've heard from a former Georgia player this offseason. Going so far as to say that Kirby Smart was pushing this team at the end of last year. Come on, guys, we got to have more sacks. We got to have more sacks. We got to have more sacks. That alone is really interesting from Ledbetter on the push they were getting from Kirby Smart to get to the quarterback more. Now, a lot of people are interpreting what Ledbetter says there as, well, that means that Dan Lanning then is going to be a really blitz-happy defensive coordinator. And that's not the way that I take that for a couple of reasons. First of all, Ledbetter himself says the act of pressuring the quarterback more, something that he believes that Dan Lanning's defense is going to do. Ledbetter himself says that doesn't mean we're taking a lot of risks. I think you got to remember that with Ledbetter's own words there. That he says we're not going to take a lot of risks, but we're going to get a lot more quarterback pressures. I think that's interesting stuff from Ledbetter describing Dan Lanning. The other reason why I believe that Ledbetter's claim that Kirby wants more sacks doesn't necessarily mean more blitzing is based on something that Kirby Smart himself has said. If you want to go back to the start of the 2017 season, when Kirby Smart addressed the issue of a pass rush and the need to improve that, Kirby went into pretty good detail before the start of 2 seasons ago about exactly what his philosophy is when it comes to rushing the passer. So take what Ledbetter just said and what Ledbetter says Kirby Smart was pushing them to do at the end of last season and compare that with what Kirby Smart has also said publicly on the same subject. I think you get an idea of what Kirby Smart's overarching philosophy is and maybe what he's going to challenge the young new defensive coordinator Dan Lanning to instill at UGA. Here's Kirby from 2017.
That's one of the big things we've tried to improve. So you can improve your pass rush by bringing more guys, or you can rush 4 better. And obviously I like to rush 4 better than bring in more guys. So we've tried to find ways to do it, but it's not always been exactly what we wanted, what we want to create, but it's certainly improving.
Kirby Smart says it's certainly improving, and if you want to go back and look at that 2017 season, that was indeed the case. In Kirby Smart's first year at Georgia, back in 2016, Georgia had just 29 sacks. But in 2017, the year that would come after that line you just heard from Kirby, they did improve up to 34 sacks that season. Unfortunately for 2018, you kind of go back the other direction again. In fact, it ends up being the low water mark for Kirby so far in his Georgia career in terms of total team sacks at just 24. But what is the recipe for getting better? Well, Jonathan Ledbetter says it's pressuring the quarterback more, but Kirby Smart himself says that doesn't mean rushing with more than 4 pass rushers. It just means finding 4 who can rush the pass rusher better. Or I should say rush the passer better, rush the quarterback better. And here's where I think things get to be pretty good news for Georgia fans when you look at this upcoming season. There is, I believe, an incredibly improved level of personnel for this Georgia roster. Maybe across the board, this is probably the most talented team that Kirby Smart's coached at Georgia. It may be, pound for pound, composite speaking, the most talented Georgia roster of all time. But the place you may see that in particular is at that outside linebacker position, the place where your pass rush generally kind of comes from more so than anything else. And it may be in particular a guy like Nolan Smith, arguably the top prospect in the country from the class of 2019. And when Jeff Sintel caught up with Nolan at the beginning of the year back in San Antonio ahead of the All-American Bowl, the high school football all-star game, Nolan made it very clear about what he's coming to Georgia to do. Ledbetter says Dan Lanning's defense going to have more quarterback pressures. Well, part of the reason why is because of better overall pass rushers. One of those guys may be Nolan Smith, and Nolan's already said he plans on taking the field with his ears pinned back, ready to get after a passer. Here's Nolan from January.
I want to rush the passer, and I really feel good rushing the passer. I got 2 sacks today in the first quarter before they started chipping me, and I just feel like that's something I'm made to do, and I love rushing the passer, sacking the quarterback. Now, I can play inside linebacker if they need me to play it, but that's not what I'm going there for.
Come on now. I mean, how much do you love that? I love rushing the passer. That's what I'm going to Georgia to do. I like to hear that from Nolan Smith, and you could hear some of the same kinds of things from Jermaine Johnson and others, including some of the second-year guys, Adam Anderson, Brenton Cox, who are going to be part of this conversation as well. And if you want to kind of circle this back to where we all started about the idea that sacks, quarterback pressures in the backfield more, that could be the missing piece of a national championship for Georgia, I think the numbers themselves kind of speak for themselves. I mean, if you go back and look at last season, it's probably not a huge surprise to find out that the reigning national champion led the country in sacks a year ago with 54. But you've also got the national runner-up of Alabama, who is 5th in the country at 45. Not every team in that sack category was a perennial national championship contender, but the 2 teams that played for the national championship both had more than 45. Clemson had 54. You've also got teams like Ohio State and whatnot in the top 10. That's the place where Georgia kind of hasn't been yet. The Georgia defense thus far under Kirby Smart has been really, really good, but maybe not truly elite, maybe not great yet. I believe the pass rush has been the missing piece in that equation. But if you listen to Jonathan Ledbetter, he says under Dan Lanning, that's going to change. And maybe it's the better personnel that helps that change. One thing's for sure, I, speaking on behalf of Georgia fans, cannot wait to see it play out. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily. We are the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, and we are really happy to have you a part of the program today, no matter how you get to us, live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, the YouTube page, the Twitter feed. We're on the radio at noon every day with our friends in the Classic City on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Rev, and we are available as a podcast pretty much wherever podcasts can be found, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. And you're going to want to remember that DawgNation.com podcast post for later on today's show when we do another Road to Atlanta t-shirt giveaway. We've got that coming up in just a couple of moments. Let me also remind you here really quickly about our friends from Kroger and a great thing they have going on right now. Did you know that you can order all your favorite items from Kroger Ship and have them delivered right there to your door? It's free shipping plus 15% off your first order when you use the code SHIP15. Use the code SHIP15 and then go to the website ship.kroger.com to start your shopping. That's ship.kroger.com. The promo code is SHIP15. It's free shipping plus 15% off your first order. You're going to want to check that out. All right, we got a lot of recruiting stuff to get into in just a couple of minutes. Our buddy Jeff Sintel is going to be here for our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All. Carson Beck, Justin Robinson, the latest on both of those recent UGA commits. We'll do all of that with Jeff Sintel in just a little bit. But before that, I told you that Mike Griffith, boy, he really has had a productive time out in Indianapolis for the scouting combine. A lot of Georgia guys were there. Mike was on hand to get some coverage from them. We do wish all those guys well as they move on to the NFL, but I won't apologize for feeling that around here, the stuff involving UGA and what these guys have to say about their time at UGA is, to me, just more fascinating and just more interesting. I thought Jonathan Ledbetter's insight on the need to rush the passer better, what Kirby Smart had told them about that, and what he thinks Dan Lanning's going to do, that's pretty good stuff right there. That's the kind of thing that'll get a Georgia fan talking, a pretty fun off-season conversation, all kind of spurred along by Jonathan Ledbetter's words. But it wasn't just that was interesting from Mike at the Combine. You should read everything that he's written at DawgNation.com. A lot of good quotes. Another one that I kind of found fascinating was Mike asks DeAndre Baker, kind of near the end of a long press conference, so what about these black jerseys at Georgia? Fans care about this kind of stuff. What about the black jerseys? Did y'all want to wear them? And I love the honesty from DeAndre Baker on this. I think this is really interesting. Here is Mike's exchange with Baker on the desire to wear the black jerseys and why Georgia never seems to. Listen to this.
Did you guys ever lobby to wear those more often?
We want to wear the black jerseys every week, but we didn't get a chance to.
You think Kirby will ever let that thing go, or will we see that anytime soon?
Never. No time soon.
I love the laugh there at the end from Baker. I don't understand what this is about. I think it is interesting to hear that DeAndre Baker said, we wanted to wear the black jerseys every single week. But he says that he doesn't think Kirby Smart's ever going to let Georgia wear them. Now, what complicates this even more is, and if you watch on video, you see this, we show all these pictures from the Georgia guys taking their visits. A lot of these guys put this stuff on social media. Listen, every single one of these pictures from every single one of these visits, it's the black jerseys on every single recruit that comes to campus. I've joked before, it's almost like the black jersey has become the dress blues of Georgia football, the kind of thing that you wear for ceremonial purposes, but not necessarily for combat purposes. I don't really understand this. Baker seems to think that it's never going to happen for Georgia again, despite the fact that they remain incredibly popular with the current players and undeniably popular with future Georgia players as well. So I don't really know what to make of this. I do know it became a little bit of a topic before the Auburn game this year in honor of the original blackout against Auburn in 2007. Maybe a return to the blackout for the 2018 Auburn game. Kirby Smart was asked about it, and so help me, it's really hard to decipher some of this stuff, but he kind of hemmed and hawed about why Georgia's not going to do it. Here's Kirby again.
We did it a couple years ago against somebody. I think it was one of the to-buy teams or something, and really – for energy and enthusiasm. I don't think you need energy and enthusiasm for Auburn. If we can't get up for Auburn, then we've got some other problems, and we got to be excited to play. And I just don't think that's not relevant to me. It's not. I'm not saying that we're not ever going to do it. I'm not saying that we are. That's just not really what's important to me. That's just me. I believe in the guys going out and playing physical, playing hard, and you don't have to do things like that to get them fired up to do it. I really think they should want to do it. It was great for recruiting, so.
So, here's my kind of opinion on this. I'm, as many of you know, like 1,000 years old. I'm one of these big believers that Georgia is cool because it only has two uniforms, the silver breeches with white on the road, the red and silver at home. So, I am absolutely a kind of dyed-in-the-wool traditionalist on most of this stuff. But my opinion on the black jerseys has evolved somewhat. Kirby Smart says there that he doesn't like the idea of the jerseys being a motivational ploy. At this time, I think this has been out there long enough now that it's not really a motivational ploy anymore. If you listen to DeAndre Baker, he's not saying, the players want to wear them because it gets them fired up. They just think they look better. They just think it's a better overall fashion statement, the black contrasting with the red helmet. So at this point in time, Kirby's concerned about this being a motivational ploy, which is a thing that I would also share. I think, unfortunately, Mark Richt pushed that button too many times in his Georgia career. That doesn't seem to be quite as much of an issue anymore. So, maybe Kirby's concerns about holding these back, maybe that's not quite worth it. But it's a big deal to fans. Apparently the Georgia players wanted to wear them too. But as we know, this is Kirby's program right now. And as of now, he is saying no to this. So we'll see how that changes maybe in 2019. All right, later on, I've got a Road to Atlanta t-shirt to give away, a fun way to do it today, and a topic we need to get into a little more deeply. We'll do that. But as many of you want, it's time to get some recruiting info from my buddy Jeff Sintel. It's also good to have you with us on DawgNation Daily as well.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All with our recruiting insider Jeff Sintel. And speaking of inside information, if you want some on the Marlowe's Tavern in your neighborhood, the way to do that's become a Marlowe's insider. Text the word Marlowe's, no apostrophe, just MARLOWS to this number, 24242, and you can become a Marlowe's insider today. Jeff Sintel, good morning to you. Before we get into the recruiting stuff, and I want to do a lot of that with you, would you agree with me that at this point in time, we were just talking about black jerseys before you joined us based on what DeAndre Baker said at the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis, that if Kirby's got a concern about this being used as a motivational ploy, at this point in time, are we kind of past that? It seems like the players themselves just want this as a fashion statement. I don't think any of them believe they'll play better because of it. I think that's something that kind of got left in the Mark Richt era. But it certainly seems like, according to DeAndre Baker's words, he doesn't think Kirby's ever going to let go on this, no matter how much recruits like them.
It'd be funny, Brandon. That's a big LOL for me on that subject this morning. What would they wear for recruiting visits if the black jerseys were like standard issue wear for a Georgia football player? I mean, I don't know. It kind of goes back to that thing you've discussed a lot on your show where you don't want to make it, blow up the moment and make any game as bigger than they are, external factors, yada, yada, yada. I think the quick way to solve this is maybe designate games at the beginning of the year as a black jersey game, or even simply, say non-conference games are now black jersey games. Conference games are red jersey games. Yeah. That would be a very quick way to do it.
I think that's a really good idea, and I think it would also be kind of funny. Like you said, recruits love the black jerseys. What would they wear if for their recruiting visits? I actually think it would be kind of funny at this point in time, considering the fact that it's almost like the recruit pictures themselves have become a little bit of a troll effort to Georgia fans because they wonder why they don't get to see those on the field. If Georgia, for its recruiting pictures, did become like Oregon, where you started seeing recruits wearing like shiny silver chrome helmets and like black pants and every different kind of jersey under the sun, just as a way of trolling fans even more because come fall Saturdays they don't wear any of that garb on the field. I actually think if Georgia went even further with that, it might be kind of funny.
Two funny moments with that, Brandon. Number one, what if Georgia can just tout itself as the only school that has an official recruiting visit uniform, which is the black jersey, which is better, probably, arguably, or at least more popular than any other jersey combination the kids might wear. The other funny thing is I'd love to one day write a story about the setup and organization of that, I guess, closet tree or that locker area where recruits can grab jerseys and go take their pictures. I would imagine, Brandon, that the ratio of jerseys they set aside for all these dudes is probably like 50% black, 25% or 30% red, and then the white jersey maybe 10%. Because I mean, this is like the unicorn of a Georgia recruiting visit. When you see a guy in a white jersey, if that's the one they take and that's the one they pop off all over social media, it says to me they didn't have a triple XL or they didn't have a small for a kicker or they didn't have what they needed in the black or the red togs right there.
Yeah, you may be right about that. All right, let me get into some of the recruiting stuff because it was a busy weekend for Georgia. I loved your piece evaluating Carson Beck as a player, and you were kind of joking about this in the comment section on video yesterday. I mean, listen, I wish I could be a better person than this, but my favorite thing about Beck initially is the fact that it seems like Georgia's taking him from Florida. Florida fans are very upset about this, and that's kind of enough for me in early March to kind of tide me over and kind of get me through another week while we wait for spring practice to begin, just knowing that Georgia's done something to make Florida mad. But beyond that, when you look at Beck as a player, there is a lot to like here, and I love the way that your piece at DawgNation.com kind of dove into Beck as kind of a cerebral guy, a guy who really seems to have a real wherewithal when it comes to understanding what's happening on the field. I hope people check that piece out for themselves at DawgNation.com. But beyond the recruiting soap opera part, which is really entertaining, give us your thoughts on Carson Beck as a player and how he kind of fits into this 2020 picture for Georgia right now. Did we lose Jeff? All right, we'll get Jeff back here in just a second. So I'm curious to hear from Jeff.
Brandon!
Hey! All right, Jeff, go ahead. Give us your thoughts on Beck as a player.
So first of all, most of the recruiting industry kind of felt, Beck was kind of betrothed or tethered to Florida. It really happened so fast when the offer happens and it creates an initial visit. What kind of bird dogs my eyes a little bit is when a spur-of-the-moment offer happens and then off the heels of that offer, a quick visit is scheduled. That's highly interesting there. I guess I'll do two things here, and I want to try and provide a little balance to, an example here for in Brandon's world of Kirby Smart walking through the high school hallways and giving a wedgie to Dan Mullen again, or maybe stuffing him into a trash can or a locker. But a couple things I'll think about here. Maybe I'll give the good first. The good here is simply this. Carson Beck's about 6'4.5", about 230. He led his team in Mandarin in Jacksonville to an 8A state championship in Florida. That's definitely big boy football there. That program was coming off a 2-8 season the year prior, threw 3,500 yards, 39 touchdowns, 8 picks. Completed about 59% of his balls. I'd like to see a little higher rate for that, especially for a kid that's seen as a cerebral, knows every formation. I think a great piece by the Athletic touted him as a walking offensive coordinator. That's all good and all. I'd still like to see high school quarterbacks that earn that Drew Brees in training status that complete around 60-65% of his balls. But then with Carson Beck, you also give him credit for 5 touchdowns and 0 interceptions in the 8A state championship game. Maybe a question Brandon would have for me is something like, Quarterback, he's number 3 this year. Can he be a 5-star? Yes. I think maybe Carson Beck, and I've kind of checked down this with a lot of other guys that I trust. We kind of all feel that Carson Beck, if he was the type of player that came out last cycle, in the 2019 cycle, might have even been the number 1 or number 2 quarterback in the class. That's just maybe a tip of the hat to Bryce Young, and also a tip of the hat to DJ Ungalele. But the thing here with Beck, though, and this is where I'm going to say, hold on, guys, lean in real close. Brandon, don't pound the table too hard, but I want to say this. Quarterbacks are a very fickle sort. Carson Beck, of all things, was actually committed to Florida at one time to play baseball. Now he's given up baseball. But I will say this. He was going to Alabama. Dan Enos left. A lot of the coaches he liked at Alabama left. That situation changed. And let's be very real here. We're very real here, friend. If a quarterback can decommit and leave Alabama, he can just as well decommit and leave Georgia as well. Need to see some roots get put down. I think Connor Riley had a fabulous story with all the parallels. He even dug even farther and found the March 3rd parallel with Carson Beck and Jay Fromm. The one difference between these two is there is with Carson Beck growing up in Duval County. He did like Georgia a lot. He did like Florida a lot. The thing with Fromm, though, he was a diehard Georgia boy, Georgia fan for his entire life, and that's the sort of thing that transcends a lot of recruiting elements that most people usually write about, most people usually talk about.
So if you're going to highlight the fact that Beck himself has other options potentially, how about Georgia itself? Because we came into the month of March thinking it might be Robbie Ashford watch. I'm assuming that Beck's presence changes that. You mentioned DJ Uiagalelei a little earlier. I guess it's always been thought that Clemson was the leader there. Maybe this is an example of Georgia knowing it's not really in it for him. Does this end Georgia's recruitment of other quarterbacks?
Well, I would think Georgia would like to do some Brandon Adams shopping and add Robbie Ashford and Carson Beck to the 2020 class, but I just don't know if that's realistic. I don't know if a lot of schools will see it that way because, Carson Beck, when you look at him on film, Brandon, he has a lot of polish. He has a lot more, big-time experience. He has a lot of good experience, and he shows a lot more polish than even some guys that Georgia's recruiting, Kobe Criswell, Robbie Ashford, guys of that nature. So, the thing there is with Carson Beck is he's the type of guy that I think establishes some real momentum for Georgia, having a hype quarterback pipeline. I think the ESPN future quarterback power ranking will once again be kind to Georgia as they kind of have now a clear succession plan where Carson Beck is a guy that can start multiple years at Georgia. I personally don't know if Dwan Mathis or Stetson Bennett are that type of guy in the succession plan beyond Fromm. There's also some really, really incredible quarterbacks in the 2022 class already in the state of Georgia. I think Georgia will have, the state of Georgia and its recruiting evaluators will have to think really hard about, is it going to be that gentleman Gunnar Stockton out of Raven County or Zach Roseman out of Walton? Of course, that's 2022, and everybody's so far ahead with that one. One thing I'll think about, Brendan, because you did mention DJ spending all those touchdowns coming out of California, I would like to just think about this, folks, and just to kind of, audience, folks, just get used to this. Clemson's going to have some major momentum in this class. They're going to get a lot of dudes. They might get Dabo's biggest recruiting class ever. We've said this before on our websites and our forums and our shows, where perhaps Georgia's biggest recruiting rival, especially because they got a lot of head-to-heads here, is not with Alabama. It's going to be with Clemson for a lot of guys, especially 3 or 4 really high-profile guys. And I think Clemson is going to do very well at receiver and quarterback in this 2020 class as well.
It's our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All with Jeff Sintel here on DawgNation Daily. Become a Marlowe's Insider by texting the word Marlowe's, M-A-R-L-O-W-S, to 24242. You can find out about big events and special offers happening right there at the Marlowe's in your neighborhood. I don't want to talk about quarterbacks the entire time, but I do want to ask you one more thing before we move on and look at some different subjects. And I guess this is, I don't know, I feel like I have to ask this. Is Georgia's experimenting with dual threat quarterbacks now over? I mean, because Carson Beck certainly feels a lot like Jake Fromm, and some of the future names that you mentioned, they kind of feel to me kind of like that same vein. Is Georgia out of the dual threat business now?
No, I think what Georgia's in the business of is getting a quarterback that can go up on the whiteboard and do a lot of things that kind of make that gift face from Kirby Smart with the popcorn from the Harrison High football game last year. I think that's what they're looking for, that quarterback that can think the position really well, know where to go with the football, can squeeze it into tight windows. And, you know, one other thing, I'm sure you touched on it with all the scouting coverage over the last couple of days, Brandon, is watching the NFL Combine, and goodness gracious, Isaac Nada has been a great Georgia Bulldog. He has been a willing 3-year starter. He has lived up to the hype as a 5-star tight end recruit. But maybe, just maybe, that clocking there in the 40-yard dash shows that, you know, this is something I've been hearing on the recruiting trail for a while. Is Georgia wants a guy with a little bit more giddy up, a little bit more acceleration to create space and create, you know, green grass downfield between trailing defenders and trailing coverage guys. I think they want to get a little bit more sports car speed at the tight end spot, rather than maybe a Humvee and a steady, reliable Humvee, which is what, you know, Isaac Nada has done. And, you know, he's going to go on to a great pro career as well. But that's one of those things out of the scouting combine that made me think a little bit. And then you also have Arik Gilbert. We talked about that guy a lot in the 2020 class, but also another 5-star out of Las Vegas, Nevada. That's Darnell Washington, who rates as the nation's number 2 athlete. Could probably play defensive end or tight end. But he's another 5-star prospect that came to Georgia this weekend and also had a very good time.
Jeff, I think that's a really interesting look at what the future of that position could be. And, boy, it was certainly interesting to see Washington on campus this week, and also interesting to see Carson Beck already kind of recruiting him and working on him, at least based on some of that social media activity. Let me do a couple other things before we let you go here. Beck was not the only commitment that Georgia got this weekend. Also, Justin Robinson, the 4-star receiver from Eagles Landing Christian Academy. We talked about him on Friday. To your credit, Jeff, you said, hey, watch out for Robinson. That's a guy that you thought should be in everyone's mock class. And then the next day, he commits to Georgia. You also talked a lot about what some of your sources have been telling you about why Robinson's more than just a guy that'll play wide receiver. He could really excel at that position. If you don't mind, and obviously we've had some fun with that because you kind of brought up a pretty big name in terms of comparison on that. If you don't mind, just kind of give us a thumbnail sketch on what you think Robinson brings to the table. You got a great piece up with him, a couple good pieces up with Robinson over the last couple of days. So just kind of give us your thumbnail on this other addition to Georgia's 2020 class.
Yeah, one thing I'm going to try to do here is, you know, recruiting timing never works well for the reporter, and I guess probably never well for the reader as well. Justin Robinson commits on Saturday night while I'm actually at the podium kind of emceeing an event for kickers and punters. And, you know, that was kind of one of those things where he didn't plan it that way, but he took a visit to Notre Dame, and then the following weekend, Cortez Hankton just said, hey, come on up for junior day. His parents couldn't make it. So he came with a couple of his Elka teammates at Eagles Landing Christian, and all of a sudden he just felt some type of way to go ahead and commit. And that one happened, and then the next day, Carson Beck, you heard really a lot of great things about Georgia after that visit regarding Carson Beck, and he goes ahead and commits. So everybody wants to hear about the quarterbacks, and they all want to hear yada, yada, yada about the quarterbacks. But made a point on Monday to kind of put some things together about Justin Robinson because I didn't want this commitment to go unnoticed or even in any way eclipsed in the 2020 class because Robinson, 6'4", 210, 37-inch vertical. He ran a 4.5 on the laser for Georgia at that speed. He's, you know, the things I really like from a scouting aspect with Robinson is you talk to a lot of people, and the one thing he already does very well is make the tough catches. Make the tough catches. Can I say that again? Make the tough catches. If you want to have a Bulldog receiver that's 6'4", that already will block his fanny parts off, that's what his coach told me. He gave him a 10 on the blocking rating. And then you can add all those things together. A 6'8" wingspan, 6'4", 210, 4.5, 37, 38-inch vertical. but also have spider webs for hands. I mean, I'm talking about Peter Parker on a good day kind of hands for this dude. The Velcro fingers, that's what Georgia has just received a commitment from in Justin Roberts.
Well, that's an exciting thing to think about, Jeff. Hey, I don't know if we're allowed to do this or not. Can we give a tiny preview of what you've got coming today at DawgNation.com? Because a pretty big name was also at Georgia this weekend. Sounds like you've had a chance to catch up with him. Are we ready to talk about this yet or not, or is this all a secret?
Nah, man. It's up on the site right now. It's just a story about Mikael Sherman. Mikael Sherman dropped the True Family Vibe line as a description in talking about Georgia. Georgia has consistently been right there with Georgia, and Mikael Sherman recruiting him very hard. He's a guy that's, sooner or later, maybe we'll do this on Before the Hedges, but we'll get around to telling that really good Todd Gurley story regarding Mikael Sherman. But had another great visit. He's back and forth now about what his timeline looks like. He spoke about maybe how Dan Lanning has really maybe stood out so far in his recruitment, the way Georgia has recruited his family, what type of family person he is. So I know this seems run-of-the-mill, guys, but there's another story with some good things about the University of Georgia and a 5-star linebacker in the 2020 class. I hope it doesn't get repetitive because there's another one that really had another great trip to Athens.
I cannot wait to read about that with Mikael Sherman at DawgNation.com, and I hope that everybody will check out that piece. Jeff, really quickly before we let you go, you mentioned Darnell Washington a moment ago. You obviously just referenced Mikael Sherman, who was on campus too. Anything else from this busy weekend that we need to know? A lot of attention gets paid to the two commits with good reason, but beyond that, any other kind of recap from what looks like a loaded time for Georgia this past weekend in Athens? Anything else you want to make sure that we're aware of before we say goodbye?
Brandon, we never say goodbye. We say until the next D&D. But I want to say this: there's probably, I know you would like for me to start spieling about silent commitments or something like that, but I would say this. I'm just going to simply say this: this might have been a weekend, especially if the Carson Beck commitment holds, and it is what it currently seems like it is, very much on the surface. This might be the weekend that kind of goes down with that scavenger hunt for the 2019 class and maybe even the ribbon-cutting day for the 2019 class for the West End Zone, where I think those are two pretty seismic days for Georgia recruiting, or at least seismic weekends for Georgia recruiting. It is at least a very good early start to the 2020 class.
And what's even better about that is if this date does go down to be remembered like we just said, it's a great chance for us to recap that some more tomorrow as well as a part of Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. Jeff, I can't wait for that. A chance for even more recruiting talk tomorrow afternoon at 3 p.m. on the DawgNation video channels and now available as a podcast as well. Really looking forward to that. Thanks for your time today as a part of our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All. We appreciate your coverage of the weekend. Really good stuff. We'll read about you with Mikael Sherman coming up a little later on, and we'll chat here again on DawgNation Daily very soon as well.
Hey, Brandon, good luck giving away a package deal of T-shirts today, man.
I'll do my best.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, so a lot with Jeff Sintel there, but one thing from me, I have to admit, stood out more than anything else, and I'm sure he loves it when I kind of put a microscope on every single word that he says and kind of parse every syllable in his phrasing there. Could not help but notice, though, that Jeff did leave the door open for a Carson Beck decommitment from Georgia. Now, that's not exactly what I expected him to say about that, but obviously Jeff kind of pumping the brakes on what was a very quick courtship with Beck taking the visit and committing to Georgia. And as Jeff was speaking, I jotted down, I guess, 3 examples that make this at least worth paying attention to. You want to go back to Emory Jones, longtime Ohio State commit, eventually ends up signing with Florida. Matt Corral, longtime Florida commit, or not longtime, but he was a Florida commit who ends up signing with Ole Miss. Tate Martell, Texas A&M commit at one point in time. He ends up signing with Ohio State. Now he's at Miami, and who knows where he's going after that. So there are some, I guess, recent examples of quarterbacks who have that commitment for a while, end up signing somewhere else. I think the takeaway on this is that Jeff said that for Beck, he needs to put down some roots at Georgia. And what I think this means is, for those of you that like Beck, I have grown to like him pretty quickly. That's one of those things we'll watch for. How much other Twitter activity do we see of him reaching out to guys like Darnell Washington? How many other unofficial visits does he take to Georgia? For a guy that lives in that Duval County, Jacksonville area, that's not super far away. He can get up to Athens, and it shouldn't be too costly to do so. You got to see a lot of examples of that. Think about the Helinski that ended up signing with South Carolina last year. That was one of those things where a lot of schools really came after him hard. Ohio State comes after him hard. Notre Dame, I think, at one point in time, really got involved with him. Maybe there was some thought that Georgia might try to circle back with him too. I don't know if that happened or not, but I was pushing for that for a while. But he never really wavered from that South Carolina pledge at all, and one of the reasons why recruiting experts like Jeff Sintel kind of had a little bit of insight that he was not going to do that is because on his own dime, he just kept going back to South Carolina on those unofficial visits. So if you want to see Jeff's example of what needs to happen, roots growing for Carson Beck at Georgia, it's those unofficial visits on his own dime. And I hate the fact that he's got to pay his own way, but that's just the rules that are in place in the NCAA. See that unfold. That'll give you an idea of how things are growing with Carson Beck when it comes to Georgia. All right, SEC through time before we do our Road to Atlanta giveaway. We talked about Nick Starkel yesterday. Took a long visit to Arkansas. He is now committed to Arkansas. I think this is a pretty big get. I think this really changes, for me, the forecast for Chad Morris at Arkansas. They recruited so badly for the class of 2018 that I thought that Morris was probably at the top of the list for SEC coaches who were going to flame out and get fired, especially for those programs who are kind of rebooting themselves all at the same time. Bielema out at Arkansas, McElwain out at Florida, Jones out at Tennessee. For a lot of those programs who were looking for that reboot, it certainly seemed like Arkansas was just way out in the wilderness because they just had no talent coming in for that class of 2018. All of a sudden now things feel differently. Remember, Chad Morris, before being SMU head coach, was Clemson's offensive coordinator for quite some time. So this is a competent quarterbacks coach. This is a guy who knows how to work with QBs, and now he's got one in Starkel. And if I'm correct about this, I believe he's got him for 2 seasons. So there's a chance to develop something there, but this is also a much better 2019 class than it was in 2018. I think it's really funny to see all the attention paid to Jeremy Pruitt at Tennessee. He was on the Feinbaum Show again yesterday. Dan Mullen in Florida. They're going to get a lot of attention. Watch for Arkansas, though, actually, to borrow Butch Jones' phrase, truly building this thing brick by brick right now. Arkansas is going to be much, much better in the future because of some of the work that Chad Morris is doing. I feel very differently about that program now based on some of the actions as of late. I think that Starkel is a real find for them at the quarterback position. This is a pretty good job. On a more serious subject and not on good news, a horrible tornado rips through Lee County in Alabama. That's right near the Alabama-Georgia border. I know there's some Georgia folks in West Georgia that have had to deal with this as well, the Cairo area, for instance. But a lot of damage being done in that Alabama region near the Auburn campus, Lee County. My understanding is that last check, there are about 25 people who've lost their life due to this. This is a sad thing. But you've already seen the Auburn folks stepping up, even the University of Alabama as well, and a lot of folks around the Tuscaloosa area, Tuscaloosa businesses, they're stepping up to support this too, which is a great thing to see. Unfortunate set of circumstances for the state of Alabama to be dealing with a horrendous tornado once again, but that is the case, and obviously our hearts and prayers and thoughts and everything else go out with the folks there and for the folks there in West Georgia who are also dealing with this as well. On a much lighter note, let me do a couple of other things here before we do Road to Atlanta. First of all, Tennessee hosts Mississippi State tonight. This is after throttling Kentucky the other day. We don't talk a ton of college basketball around here just because our audience mostly wants to hear football. But Tennessee's a big Georgia rival, and as we get closer to March, the Vols start to look a lot more like a real team. The Vols start to look a lot more like a team that can make some noise come March. Rick Barnes is not someone I typically think of as a great coach, but let's face it, he's done a pretty good job at Tennessee this year. I'm a little curious, do Dog fans even care about this? Or is this the kind of thing that's on a Georgia fan's radar whatsoever to root against Tennessee having success? We know what would happen if the Vols were on the verge of some football success. There'd be a lot of folks cheering against them. I'd be a little curious to find out how that plays out when it comes to the basketball situation, but that is going to go on You can reach out to me at DawgNation Daily on Twitter if you want to respond to that. Let me also give credit to the SEC baseball here. 11 teams ranked in the most recent top 25. That is a pretty good performance by the SEC baseball. And then before we close up the SEC through, I do want to show you this. Drew Butler, former guest here on DawgNation Daily, former Georgia punter. On Twitter, I saw this. He had a pretty funny picture out there. This may be an example of cheering for too many teams. So if you're watching on video, you can obviously see this. If you're not, I'll describe it to you. So here's a pickup truck with a Florida license plate. And then on the back of the bed of the truck, or the gate of the truck, you've got an Alabama chrome logo, a South Carolina chrome logo, and what looks to also be a Georgia chrome logo, although I guess there's a chance at the Green Bay Packers. This looks to be 4 different SEC teams being cheered for by one person there on that. That's more of a roulette strategy than an actual, I guess, rooting interest when it comes to the SEC. That's pretty odd stuff there, but kind of funny from Drew Butler on Twitter. And with that, we'll make that your SEC through. All right, here on DawgNation Daily, as I said before off the top of the program, I did want to apologize because I did not draw the winner of our Road to Atlanta t-shirt giveaway from yesterday. We were asking for pics of people being subscribed to our podcast on the Apple Podcast player. I will do that drawing today, and I will announce that winner tomorrow. So tomorrow we'll announce 2 winners of our Road to Atlanta t-shirt giveaway. I apologize for that. Today's Road to Atlanta t-shirt giveaway is going to be a little different, though. I'm going to try to make this different over the course of time just to make it fun for the audience and give everybody kind of a chance to participate. And there are a couple things here around DawgNation that we want to do really well and really in a fun way in 2019. And the Road to Atlanta t-shirt giveaway gives us a chance to do that. So let me set up today's this way. Yesterday here on the program, pretty fascinating conversation with Chip Towers on the subject of the possibility that one day the field at Sanford Stadium might be named for Vince Dooley. Chip went into detail about why he thinks that's something that needs to happen. I want you to see this and hear this for yourself. Here is Chip's take on why this is something that needs to be done. Here's Chip from yesterday.
When Vince Dooley showed up in December of 1963, Sanford Stadium set 35,000 people. In fact, that first season in 1964, they added 7,500 or so temporary seats in what is now the East End Zone to bring it to like 43,000 for the first game in 1964. As we all know, Sanford Stadium now seats 93,000, and most of that is because of Vince Dooley, either because of Georgia winning 6 SEC championships, certainly winning the 1980 national championship indirectly led to the enclosure of the east end of the stadium in 1981, which really brought it up to, I think at the time, was 82,000 seats. And the bottom line is, I definitely think at the very least, it should be Dooley Field at Sanford Stadium.
So that's Chip Towers saying why he thinks the field ought to be renamed in Dooley's honor because of the impact that Dooley has had on the growth of Sanford Stadium over the years. I think that Chip lays that out in a really interesting way. I'll also invite you to check out what Coach Dooley himself had to say about this on Sunday in Chip's piece at DawgNation.com. Dooley's obviously flattered by the honor. He's not going to campaign for this, even if the honor is due him. He's not going to say that. But you ought to read the piece from Chip from Sunday at DawgNation.com. You can listen to yesterday's edition of DawgNation Daily to hear more about this. But here is how this ties into the Road Atlanta t-shirt giveaway for today. Here's what I want you to do. We post our show every single day as a podcast at the world-famous DawgNation.com. I'd like for you to go into the podcast post today and down at the bottom of the comment section. I'd love for you to respond about whether you think that Coach Dooley ought to have his name on the field at Sanford Stadium. Some Georgia fans say, no, I want to leave this just Sanford Stadium. One name's enough. Other Georgia fans say, no, we really believe in Coach Dooley's legacy at Georgia. We want to see him get that honor. I'd be curious to hear from you. Your thoughts on this one way or another aren't going to win you the t-shirt. I'm simply going to look at all the comments that are there, and I'm going to draw someone's name to be the winner on that. Because one of the things we want to do over the course of our year here around DawgNation is to make the program as fully interactive as we possibly can. People get a chance to talk to us live on video every day. We do our R.S. Andrews Cool Down, but we want to have more opportunities for comments even after the show's off the air. This is an example of a way we can do that, and we're going to honor somebody today with a Road to Atlanta t-shirt for our comment section there, so please check that out, the world-famous DawgNation.com. When we post the show, it'll be up around noon or 12:30 or so. Go in there, put your thoughts in there. We'll draw out a name, and that person will win a Road to Atlanta t-shirt. Do you think that the field ought to be renamed for Vince Dooley? Love to hear your thoughts on that. Let me also say it's been 857 days since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. It's our Gator Hater Updater. We'll talk to you tomorrow right here on DawgNation Daily. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down, where we get a chance to react to everything happening around the program. And obviously, if you have thoughts on the Dooley thing, we'd love to have you weigh in on those when we post the show at DawgNation.com a little later on. But just for now, I'd like to have that as a part of our conversation today. You can weigh in on what Jeff had to say about Carson Beck, what Chip had to say about Vince Dooley, the stuff from Jonathan Ledbetter off the top of the program, a lot of juicy stuff to kind of kick around here. So we'll do that as a part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Let me also remind you that R.S. Andrews, this time of year, when you got very, very cold weather the next few nights, it means you want your furnace working well, but then after that, it's probably going to take a turn for the warm once again, which means it's time to kick on that air conditioning, maybe for the first time. Those systems in your house, you hope they're working right. The only way to know that for sure is to get one of those great tune-ups and checkups from our friends at R.S. Andrews. They do heating and cooling, but it's not just that. It's also plumbing and electrical as well. So those things that need fixing in your house, but you're not quite sure that you can do them, don't even mess with it. Let the folks from R.S. Andrews come out. When they do, the cool thing about R.S. Andrews is they show up on time. They do the work that's promised. No surprises with the price. You can trust them, in other words. We trust them here around DawgNation. In fact, they're the only ones we would trust for heating and plumbing and electrical and air conditioning and everything like that. So please find them online at rsandrews.com. That's rsandrews.com. And we appreciate them being a part of our R.S. Andrews School down here today on DawgNation Daily. Now, Jim Goodman says in our Facebook comment section, hate it for you folks in Georgia where it's cold, but it's 88 and sunny right here in Fort Lauderdale. Jim, you have certainly made us jealous on that for sure. Paul Amerson also says, I think it should be Dooley Field at Sanford Stadium. And I guess I'm starting to become of the belief that it should be as well. I thought that Chip actually laid out in the audio that I just played for you. I thought that Chip laid out a pretty convincing case for why this honor in particular is befitting Dooley. Now, the hyphenated stadium name, that can be a little cumbersome, the Sanford Dooley Stadium, maybe that doesn't quite make sense. Maybe that doesn't look as nice to other people. But because of the impact Dooley in his 40 years at Georgia, 25 as head coach, another 25 as athletic director, someone overlapping it there towards the end. When you look at that impact and the growth of the stadium, both in terms of how it goes from, there's a really cool old edition of the AJC, or I guess back then it would have been just the Atlanta Journal, that's in our buddy BJ's office who works with us. And the picture of Sanford Stadium back then, much, much smaller, looks like almost like a high school stadium. The way that's grown now to 93,000 people, Vince Dooley had a huge impact on that. The games he won as coach led you to an 82,000-seat stadium. Then as athletic director in the early 90s, he led the expansion the first time that the West End Zone was closed in. Went over 90,000 with the, or I guess that one time went over 85,000 with the stadium, and then the push towards the 92, 93,000 it is now. Vince Dooley's DNA is all over all of that, and I do think it's wrong that Georgia hasn't done more to honor him, and I do put my support behind naming the field after Vince Dooley. I'd love to see that happen. I'd love to have you weigh in on that more if you'd like to as well. Phil Rogers says he likes the idea of Sanford Dooley Stadium. Okay, there's that. John Jared Bailey says Dooley Field at Sanford Stadium sounds just about right. I have to say this. I think that sounds right. Gary Westmiller says the Dooley Walker Field. In other words, pushing for an honor for Herschel Walker. We talked about this with Chip yesterday as well. And Chip had an interesting phrase. He says that UGA has an aversion to statues, and I'll never really understand that. I don't understand that at all. What it kind of reminds me of is, for those of you who have ever been to Disney World, like one of the major tenets of Disney World is they believe that the stuff that happens behind the scenes, they call it backstage. The stuff that happens backstage should never be seen by the ticket-paying patrons of Disney World. All that stuff behind the scenes should stay behind the scenes. I think that sometimes Georgia has a bit of a backstage problem. I think sometimes Georgia lets stuff that's behind the scene and backstage creep out into the public view way too much. Because here's what the rank and file public wants. They want, if a player performed well in the field, he ought to get a statue. If a coach or an athletic director led Georgia to unprecedented heights, he ought to get some sort of name after him type honor. But behind the scenes at Georgia, it seems like this kind of stuff always goes back to money. Well, so-and-so donated this, and he doesn't want that, or so-and-so didn't donate this, so therefore he doesn't get this, or he doesn't get that. And that's probably true for all universities, and it's probably true for all athletic departments. I think at Georgia, that kind of stuff becomes way too public from time to time. I think sports fans love the idea of meritocracies, that good players get statues because of their performances on the field, that coaches and athletic directors get names on things because of their value to the organization. And yet, Georgia, a lot of this stuff seems to go back to donor checks, and even if that's just the natural cost of doing business, the fact that that seems to be so top of mind with everything that goes on with the UGA is honestly probably not a great look for the athletic department. Let me get a few more comments here. Kent Caldwell says, Sanford Dooley Stadium I'm fine with. Love coach as a coach, and he did turn us around to a power to be reckoned with nationally. He goes on, though, to say that he had a problem with some of the coaching hires that Dooley made after he was gone there. And, obviously there is that gap in the 90s as much as, I think that Ray Goff was a great player at Georgia and as a coach just didn't really work out. I think that Jim Donnan is a great advocate of UGA. Obviously, he didn't win as much at Georgia as he would have liked to either. And, you can put that on Coach Dooley if you want. But ultimately, I think it's the larger picture of kind of where Georgia was after Coach Dooley found it that I think that matters more than anything else. And there's no doubt that that Coach Dooley left UGA a lot better than he found it, which is ultimately the thing that matters more than anything else. Miriam Martin Corbin asked an interesting question. What's that going to leave for Kirby when he retires as the winningest coach of all time, which I expect him to be? Now, I think that Miriam, I guess maybe half kidding, half serious, brings up a really good point that part of the issue with changing names of things really quickly is that it doesn't leave you a lot of wiggle room later on when you might indeed want to name something after someone else. And if Kirby Smart, who after 3 years in the job would seem to be certainly heading in a very, very quickly upward direction, if he ultimately deserves to have something named after him, what's left for there to be? And I guess that's probably a pretty fair question. I'd also say that while Mark Richt probably finishes just south of having a field named after him or anything like that, I've made my case before that he deserves some kind of honor around Georgia. People have said, well, maybe it'll be the indoor practice facility, given the push that he did make to get that done. And that's already, belonging to the Payne family with their name on that. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's a street or what. But there ought to be something historic that remembers the 15 years of Mark Richt, because while it comes up a little short of a national championship, it was certainly very good. Certainly very good. Crow King 123 says on YouTube, if Kirby wins 8 national championships, we'll just rename the whole university after him. And listen, I think that's probably not too far off, frankly. Justin Wolf says, let's put an area near the dog walk and just start building statues and call it the statue area. Hire some Roman architects, not any of these contemporary statue artists, and start building. I agree with Justin on this. Anytime I go to, and I've been lucky enough to travel to a few like Major League Baseball ballpark, it's the first thing I do. I go and look at their own monument park. And I'm a big believer that no matter how small your history is, some major league teams have more great players than others. I think your 4 or 5 best players all deserve statues. And so if you go to Yankee Stadium and you look at their monument park, this is like Babe Ruth and Mickey Mantle and all these people, and there's a huge line usually to get into like Monument Park there at Yankee Stadium and see all those guys. The new SunTrust Park for the Braves got their own version of that. It's a really cool thing to walk through. But even if you go to like the new Comiskey Park in Chicago or whatever it's called now, you've got like statues for like Carlton Fisk and Harold Baines. These are not necessarily household names when it comes to to all-time baseball greats. They're very good players, and I guess Baines himself is also going to the Hall of Fame too. But it's not the same thing as Babe Ruth, but they're the best players in White Sox history, so therefore they get a statue. I could stand to see half dozen statues outside Sanford Stadium. Connor Riley, I can hear his microphone coming on. That means he's getting ready to join us. I could stand to see a half dozen statues.
Here's my question with statues. Would you be open to them being like replaced if it is clear someone has taken their spot in the top 5 or 6 players? Or are you open to just forever having 80 statues?
I've never seen a statue that didn't have a right to exist. So let's say you do a statue for so-and-so player from this era, and then later on somebody eclipses that. Mm-hmm. There's something to be said for this is what one of our statue players used to be. Think about how the program has grown. Because, if you look at the 4 retired numbers that Georgia has, 3 of those are unquestionable all-time greats. Trippy and Sinkwich and Herschel. These are short list of the great college football players of their era. You can make a really good case, and I guess I probably would argue it, that Herschel Walker's the best player of all time. But the 4th jersey retired by Georgia is Theron Sapp, who many of you know is known as the drought breaker, because at the time, beating Georgia Tech for Georgia was a really big deal. I want to say that it had been 8 consecutive years of Tech beating Georgia when Sapp scored the touchdown that won that game. That is unheard of in modern times, to think that just by beating Georgia Tech, I think one time, or certainly the one win that seems to matter more than anything else, all of a sudden that got you into the retired jersey conversation with 2 Heisman Trophy winners and a number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft. But back at that era, that's what Georgia used to be. I'm kind of okay with statues being thought of the same way. In this era, that's what got you a statue.
Doesn't fully answer my question.
I'm not tearing statues down. I'm not.
Well, no, you can give them to the family, or they can go put them, in a local museum or something, or Georgia adds it to their museum. But like publicly displayed statues outside Sanford Stadium, I believe should be recognized as like the 5 either best Georgia football players or the people most important to Georgia football.
Well, what you really have in a lot of places is you have a specific criteria that gets you that statue. At Florida, I believe it's just Heisman Trophy winners, right? So you got Spurrier and Werfel and Tebow. I don't like Florida, but that seems like a pretty good idea. If you've got 3 Heisman winners, all 3 of those guys, for their own reasons, are kind of iconoclastic, former Florida players. Give them their statue. At Alabama, it's national championship coaches. And listen, given the way that Alabama's pencil whipped the rest of the country when it comes to claiming national championships, that's a lot of different names, but that's their criteria and they stick to it. So maybe to solve your problem when it comes to the Georgia statues, it's you get a statue for a certain accomplishment. Either you win a national championship, you win a Heisman, you win maybe you get DeAndre Baker and Roquan Smith in there because they won a national award. That'll also get you David Pollock.
I would say I could hear a case for Roquan getting a statue, but I'm not giving DeAndre Baker a statue.
For winning the Thorpe Award?
No. It's not that big of a deal.
But why would you be such a Scrooge for statues? Like, who would
statues should mean something. Like
he won the Thorpe Award.
Doesn't mean anything. Who won the Thorpe Award 2 years ago?
I don't care, but if they made a statue of him, I'd remember.
When you take Charlie, or when Charlie's taking his kids to Georgia football games, and he wants to show this is what matters to Georgia football. I think Roquan Smith should, theoretically, Charlie or whoever should be able to take their kid and say, this guy really mattered to Georgia football.
Roquan Smith really did matter.
I'm not arguing with Roquan Smith. I think Roquan Smith should get a statue.
But if you're going to give one to Roquan for winning the Butkus and Pollock for winning the whatever one he won.
I'm not giving Pollock a
You're not giving Pollock a statue? No. Oh, I think you have to. I think you have to.
Because if we start giving them so let's say Georgia keeps winning and they keep producing great players. We're going to have 100 statues?
I wouldn't have a problem with that. I mean, look, if you look at the cities that have the most tourists, it just so happens they're also the ones that have the most statues. Washington, D.C., New York, overrun with statues, also overrun with tourists. I think people like statues. So national award that gets you Pollock, that gets you DeAndre Baker, that gets you Roquan Smith. And listen, I'm not going to lie, DeAndre Baker is a little bit of an outlier there in comparison to Pollock and Roquan, but that's just the criteria I would establish. Now, Dapper Dan had an interesting point. Let me get Dapper. Where'd he go? Dapper says, I'm kind of on the Florida line that you have to at least win a Heisman or a championship. And I understand that point, but defensive players are essentially ineligible for the Heisman. I don't care what the overall stated criteria is. Defensive players are ineligible. So if you want to, and on this point I'm being completely serious. Let's say that Georgia really did open up kind of a Monument Park type thing. You can't say that Frank Sinkwich's contribution to Georgia is greater than David Pollock's is. I think that Sinkwich's contribution was incredible. Winning a Heisman in the early 40s is a tremendous accomplishment. But Pollock playing at a best in the sport type level on the defensive side of the ball to the tune of an SEC championship when it had been 20 years since Georgia had won one. I think that Pollock's contribution to Georgia is similar to Sinkwich's contribution in the early 40s. So therefore, I'd want to see Pollock get a statue.
Maybe I'm pretty sure I'm wrong on Pollock. Maybe I'm just being a little too hard on him. But I don't know. Roquan Smith nearly single-handedly won Georgia a national championship. Would you give Nick Chubb or Sony Michel a statue? A combined statue for the two of them?
I'd give everybody
See, you're like
I am very open to statues. I love the idea of a combined statue. It'd be the kind of thing where it's almost like a double bust, and then down at the bottom it says highest rushing total for a tandem in NCAA history. I'd be fine with that. I'd be very, very open to that.
See, people love to blame millennials and say they're winning all these participation trophies. It's your generation that's given out the participation trophies. Everyone gets a statue. I think and kind of serious here, having a statue should mean something.
I don't disagree with that point, but I got Ron Brown saying Hines Ward. If he had a statue, I'd take a picture. Listen, if Hines Ward had a statue, I'd take a picture of it. The same with somebody said Terry Hogue. John Anthony says, David Pollock stripping the ball. I believe it was Phil Petty, who's the South Carolina quarterback. Can you imagine how cool that statue would be? Petty back to pass, and Pollock taking the football out of his hands. If that's a statue, who wouldn't take a picture?
I'd be willing to make an amendment to statues if you have a very signature moment. So, for example, Herschel's signature moment / statue would be him plowing over Bill Bates. Pollock's would be that strip stack. I think Roquan Smith's would be stopping Baker Mayfield on third down in the overtime of the Rose Bowl. Yeah,
that's why somebody said, let me find this one. Who said this? Somebody said, how about just busts instead of statues as kind of a compromise? That would certainly be a lot easier, but I think it's a lot cooler to have the full-on statue. If you go see the Dooley statue, which is just to the, I guess if you're walking out the building, just to the right of the Butts-Mehre Athletic Complex, the fact that it's a full-on statue of the image that I sort of picture Dooley more so than anything else being carried off the field, that is the fact that it's a full-on statue makes it even better, because back in that era of the 80s, now listen, for a Scrooge like Connor, he'd really hate this. After big wins, the players would put the coach on his shoulders and take the coach off the field. I sort of wish we'd bring that back. I wouldn't mind seeing my favorite picture probably in the annals of Georgia football history is after a victory over Alabama when Bear Bryant was coach, Vince Dooley shaking his hand, but Vince Dooley is up on the player's shoulders, so he's having almost like the king of the realm. He's having to bend down to shake the much lower and dejected Bear Bryant's hand. I don't know what year this is because it was before I was born, but y'all should find that picture if you can. It's my favorite picture in Georgia football history. Dooley being lifted up on the shoulders, reaching down to shake the hands of the peasant Bear Bryant. That's a terrific.
Do you think coaches should get Gatorade baths after every game? They should be carried off the field?
I'm actually not a huge fan of the Gatorade bath.
Really?
Not a huge fan. First of all, here's a little known fact about the Gatorade bath. Started out as a negative.
Yep.
The Giants under Bill Parcells in '86, the ones that started that, they actually started the Gatorade bath because they didn't like Parcells. This was their way of mocking him. I think that I'm always nervous about early misfires in the Gatorade bath. I feel there've been a lot of those, and I'm always a little bit worried about that. So I'm actually not as big into the Gatorade bath.
I will say one of my personal favorite Gatorade baths, I know it's not a great personal memory, but when Alabama won their first national title under Saban, when they beat Texas, and they went to go dump the Gatorade on them, when they pulled the Gatorade thing over him, it came down and hit him on the back of the head. And part of
Awesome.
me makes me think that, it was maybe a little bit of love tap on the back of the head there.
Yeah, listen, if you just put it over him, you'd have him trapped in there still today. He'd still be trapped underneath that bucket. Jeff Boyle says, what about Larry Munson Stadium? So here's the thing, Jeff. If you go to the home radio booth at Sanford Stadium, I've been lucky enough to do a broadcast from in there. If you go to the home radio booth, it is named after Larry Munson. There is a very nice plaque outside the radio booth, kind of like if you ever go to like a historic monument anywhere in Georgia. I'm talking about it's really, really high quality. I don't even know what that type of metal is called, but this is like a legitimate plaque out front. And on the inside, there's a beautiful mural of Munson, and it says, Larry Munson broadcast booth. So if you're looking for a nice way to honor Munson in the press box at the home radio booth, it actually really is a very well done tribute to Larry Munson, which is obviously incredibly fitting. How about this? Somebody's Facebook profile is Vince Dooley Field at Sanford Stadium. Well, there you go. Somebody's very much into this. I like to see that. Good stuff. I'll give that a like. Mark Davis says, I'm too easy on giving out statues. Maurice Carter says, we're getting way left on this next topic, please. We got to have a little fun from time to time.
It's the offseason. We gotta have fun.
Gotta have a little time, a little fun. But we can talk about something else, too, though. By the way, one more on these. Cheyenne Taylor de la Garza says, what about Lindsey Scott running against Florida in 1980? I'm not saying no to it. I'm telling you right now, I am not saying no to it. Connor, I'll ask you to change the subject to satisfy Maurice. What'd you think of Jeff opening the door for a Carson Beck decommitment? I was a little surprised to hear that.
In today's day and age, it's not surprising, and I do think given how quickly, and I put quickly in quotation marks there, this all sort of came together, again, it wouldn't really surprise me a whole lot. As he said, I wrote about, the comparisons to him and Jake Fromm, and he did bring up the point that, Fromm was a lifelong Georgia fan. Georgia was the school he wanted to go to. And the only reason he committed to Alabama was because Brian Schottenheimer just didn't think Fromm was all that great. Which, clearly,
which is pretty fitting for the Brian Schottenheimer resume.
And I just think, given that Florida wants him bad, given him that he's already decommitted once, I do think that this is something that fans should it shouldn't come as a total shock and surprise.
Yeah, so I like I said, after Jeff said that, it was a little bit surprising to me, but I did jot down three names pretty quickly. Emory Jones decommits from Ohio State recently. Corral decommits from Florida.
Justin Fields decommits from Penn State.
Yeah, there's that. Martell decommits from Texas A&M. So this has happened a little bit. I do think watching him plant those roots, and as I said before, the comparison with Helinski, who visited South Carolina a lot, we'll know how serious Carson Beck is, depending on the number of unofficial visits he takes. And honestly, I don't know how many of those become public. Some of those will, some of those won't. I'm not quite sure, but we're going to want to see a lot of unofficial visits for Beck because I have really grown to like him. Just in kind of playing a little catch-up on this pretty quickly, I've grown to think that Carson Beck has a chance to be a really interesting prospect for Georgia.
Yeah, apparently he played very well at the Orlando opening regional. I think a big thing to look for with regards to Carson Beck is whether or not he's at G-Day. I think you can you'll be able to see and tell, especially because Georgia's spring game is a week later than a lot of the other big programs like Alabama, Clemson, etc. If he's there for that, that should have you feeling pretty good about where he stands with Georgia. And if he's not, that might be sort of a cause for concern there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I'm looking forward to Jeff's piece on Mikael Sherman coming up at DawgNation.com.
Already out.
Oh, it's already out. So y'all don't leave my comment section yet, but please check that out because that is that's a potential good name to think about. And Georgia making some quick work with him, I think, also speaks well to the rest of that geographic area where you've got Marshawn Lloyd, you've got Brian Brzee, you've got some really interesting players from that D.C. area. I think that could be an interesting thing to see. Let me also go back to the beginning. Here's the part of our R.S. Andrews cool down to what we talked about at the top of the program. I think that the numbers that I gave off the top of the show kind of speak for themselves a little bit when it comes to sacks. I thought what Jonathan Ledbetter had to say on that was really interesting. Connor, are you of the belief that that much the same way I talk about more deep throws down the field, that the defensive version of that, the missing piece for Georgia, is more sacks? Georgia's got to eclipse that 40 number. If they want to be a serious national championship level defense, you can't have 24 sacks. You got to get 40 plus sacks.
It's not just sacks. It's sacks and tackles for loss. I think Georgia ranked 95th in the country last year in tackles for loss. It helps to create more negative plays because as good as Georgia's bend don't break defense was last year, I think you saw, especially in the second half of that Alabama game, when you weren't able to really put Jalen Hurts in long distance situations where he was going to have to throw. I think it makes it a lot harder on the defense. And, like you sort of saw in the LSU and Texas games, when you're not getting tackles for loss on early downs and it sort of allows teams to get to 2nd and 5, 2nd and 6s, it just makes it that much easier to sort of chew up clock, wear out a defense, and that certainly has an effect over the course of those games. And I think that's why you sort of saw Georgia's defense look a little slow and sluggish in the later stages of both the LSU and Texas games.
Yeah, I think that's certainly fair. And I think I did a pretty good job of laying out why Kirby calling for more sacks is not the same thing as calling for more blitzes. If Georgia has to blitz to get more sacks, now at some point in time you got to get after the quarterback, and against Alabama I think he probably did dial up more pressures last December. But if you're having to blitz to do it, you're taking a shortcut that's going to cost you eventually. So if Ledbetter says Kirby was challenging them to get more sacks last season, presumably he's challenging Dan Lanning to do the same thing in 2019. I personally don't believe that means more blitzes, and I think Kirby Smart's previous words on this are a pretty strong indication of that being true.
Well, right, and for the fans calling for more blitzes, I could say, well, do you want to go back to the Todd Grantham era, because that was a blitz-heavy scheme, and that led to the creation of 3rd and Grantham, and it puts your corners a lot of times in isolated and compromised positions. So more blitzing isn't a solution, I think. Well-timed blitzes, yes, but making blitzing a consistent part of your defensive strategy, I don't think is a winning and successful strategy.
Couple comments on YouTube. Mike D says, didn't we sack Tua on 2nd 26 and lost the game, busted coverage? It all goes hand in hand. Knockdown, pass, or interceptions take all day long too. So I kind of agree with Mike on that it's not just sacks, but Georgia's been pretty good at virtually everything but the stuff in the backfield, the tackles for loss, and the pressuring the quarterback. Now, you're right, it was a bad breakdown on 2nd 26, but ultimately that doesn't change the fact that Georgia still needs to do more of what it did on that first down play back in that overtime at the end of the 2017 season. K9 Blues also says, we got after Alabama in the SEC championship game. That was the best we got after Tua all day. We just started to scheme more of a prevent type. You also have the issue where DeAndre Walker leaves that game a year ago. And I think when you look ahead to 2019, one of the things I'm hoping for, because of Nolan Smith, who I mentioned, Jermaine Johnson, who you can talk about, Brenton Cox, Adam Anderson being a year older. I guess you would include Walter Grant in this discussion. You can as well. What I'm hoping is that Georgia's pass rush isn't quite as reliant on just one name. If DeAndre Walker was put in handcuffs a year ago, or if he was taken off the field because of an injury, I think the pass rush for the most part kind of disappeared. And what you hope is that in 2019, Georgia can spread the wealth on that just a little bit more.
Right. You don't want your pass rush to be solely based off of one guy. And to K9's point, I thought DeAndre Walker did an exceptional job of getting after Tua in that game, but once DeAndre left and things sort of fell apart, especially when you have young freshman pass rushers like Adam Anderson and Brenton Cox sort of providing the pressure off the edge, just because maybe lack of experience or, maybe the moment being a little too big for them, they kind of got a little bit exposed in that second half of that game.
I agree with James Bryant, who says if you have to blitz, you're in trouble. I think that James is right on that. That's why you can look at some of those teams that did have a lot of sacks a year ago. Northern Illinois had 50. UAB had 48. Louisiana Tech had 45. Marshall had 42. There's a way to game those numbers. You can gimmick up a pass rush. I mean, UAB was a pretty good team, but for the most part, most of those teams that I just mentioned, you're not necessarily trading fortunes with them because you can gimmick up the final number if you want to, but if you're having to take a shortcut to get to those sacks, then it's going to cost you somewhere else, which some other people have mentioned. That's why Kirby Smart says, I want to rush 4 better. I don't necessarily want to rush more than 4 to get those sacks. Miriam Martin Corbin said she had to check out of the program. Miriam, we appreciate you being with us every day, and all of you who watch here as a part of our video and the R.S. Andrews cool down. Philip Jordan Wells says the pass rush starts from the line first and then the edges. Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, all these units defensively kind of coexist together, and I think that Philip's making a pretty good point on that. Peter Jeffrey Wilson says Fromm almost has to leave early, a reference to the quarterback recruitment. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but I do stand by what I said yesterday. When you move forward after that, I don't know how many veteran senior quarterbacks we're going to see for the national championship teams moving forward. I mean, over the course of the next 3 to 4 years. I think that Fromm's a little bit of a special case for how he came into Georgia and how he's performed in competitions side by side against guys like Jacob Eason and Justin Fields. But I think the future of the position is going to look a little different. You look at the Hornibrook kid who's leaving Wisconsin as an example of this. A lot of seniors who stick around, who don't leave early to go to the NFL, they seem to find it more comfortable to the idea of playing somewhere else. And I think that Georgia's not going to be immune to this either, where if Fromm stays at Georgia for 2021, I think that's going to be a really good thing for the Dogs. Fromm's going to be a record-setting, historically good quarterback at Georgia. But I do think there's a little bit of a chance he is a little bit of the last of a breed. We just see things change. And I think this is an example of that changing, where the best young quarterbacks are going to want to play right away. One of the most attractive things to me about Carson Beck is he may be one of the very few, kind of top 5 quarterbacks, top 100 players in the country who's apparently willing to sit for a year, because obviously he at least have some thought that that Fromm will still be at Georgia in 2020. So I mean, the fact that he's willing to wait a year maybe speaks well of him and his willingness to kind of grow into that role. We used to see a lot of redshirt freshman quarterbacks play really well. I mean, as recently as 5 years ago, that was the case. But it's changed a good bit recently. Now we're seeing a lot more very young players playing well, very young players doing things. This is also true across all sports as well. There was a thing I was reading the other day about how much more productive baseball rookies are now, guys in their first year of Major League Baseball, than they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, certainly 20 years ago. We're just in an age now where young, capable athletes are much more capable of performing, and the impatience that you see exist a lot of places kind of exists for good reason. We're also seeing some rookie quarterbacks in the NFL playing better now than we used to see. College football is not going to be immune to that because of the growth of high school football. So Fromm is the kind of special player at Georgia who may stay all 4 years that you ought to be really thankful for and really enjoy while he's here, because I just don't believe that's what the future of college football is going to look like very much.
So what do you make of Oklahoma, who brought in the number 1 overall quarterback prospect in the 2019 class, bringing in a senior quarterback, Jalen Hurts, who's probably going to start there?
I think there's some evidence that the young man they brought in, and I've blanked on his name. Yeah, Spencer Rattler. I think he's unhappy about that. I mean, wasn't there some talk that he feels like Oklahoma made a promise to him they didn't keep?
Yeah, they had said that they weren't going to bring in a quarterback, and that was probably in reference to Justin Fields. And then a few weeks later, I believe after he had signed early, they bring in Hurts.
Now, I'm not a Hurts fan necessarily. I believe there's a really good chance that Rattler beats him out over the course of this year. I don't believe that Jalen Hurts will finish the season as Oklahoma's starting quarterback, but this would seem to be an example of Oklahoma seeing a pathway to go out and get a guy that played, so therefore they did do that. But it's the kind of thing where if Rattler doesn't eventually beat out Hurts, I think he's going to be just as unhappy at Oklahoma as other guys have, proven to be at other places. We're in a day and age, I believe, where the relationship between quarterback and coach or program is very transactional. Programs want to get the most they can as quick as they can out of the players, and then they move on. I think the players can treat the programs much the same way. Give me my opportunity or I'm going to move on. There is no sentimentality whatsoever right now, at least seemingly, between the relationship between high school quarterback or just young quarterback in general and program. There would seem to be an example of being used on both sides right now.
So do you think that, let's say just in this hypothetical, Hurts comes in, he starts and plays the whole year. You think Rattler's going to bolt at the end of the season?
I think there's a very good chance that he would bolt just simply because.
Even though Hurts is a 1-year guy.
I think if you're Oklahoma, the thing you risk here is making him mad and poisoning the well with him, despite the fact that the opportunity to step in and play, right away may still be there for 2020. I think there's a chance you just make him mad. Now, I can't guarantee it's going to work out that way, but guys don't want to watch. I heard Deion Sanders say this on the NFL Combine yesterday that he never learned anything from watching a play. That the idea that you come in and you contribute to depth for a while and you learn. I do think there's some value in that. Dion kind of poo-pooed that on the combine coverage, saying, I never learned anything from watching a play. You learn from playing. Whether that's right or that's wrong, that is what seemingly quarterbacks seem to believe right now. And I guess given how many of their brethren are having success right away, it's easy to understand why they feel that way.
I mean, to Dion's point, I would say, Patrick Mahomes, I think, benefited greatly from sitting a year and from learning and sort of getting brought up to speed. And I do think, someone like Rattler, Oklahoma's going to blow out a lot of their opponents anyway. That first year, he can sort of be brought up to speed and, get adjusted to the college game, even if it isn't a Big 12 level. It's not quite the same. So I personally disagree with what Sanders said, and I know he played, but you know.
There's a chance he's wrong, but that is what he said. G. Gray says that he doesn't think that Rattler's ready, and he may not be. Last year was kind of an unusual year for quarterbacks, in that I don't think it was quite as deep as it has been in recent years, and Jeff even kind of alluded to that when he was on the show a moment ago. Can I make one kind of obscure points about quarterbacks here before we get ready to go?
Just show.
And I'll do this really quickly because I know a lot of you won't really care about this, but the biggest story in sports of all right now is LeBron James, the fact that the Lakers aren't going to make the NBA playoffs. I think when LeBron's career is done, I think one of the things that needs to be said about him is he made a fatal mistake more than once of thinking that outcomes can be controlled. In other words, if I go play at this place, I can build the roster that I want, and I can guarantee the outcome that I'm seeking. But in Miami, despite the fact that he won championships, by the time that kind of played itself out, he actually wasn't that happy there. Goes back to Cleveland. By the end, he was not really that happy there either. Now he's in L.A., and certainly there's plenty of evidence that he's not very happy in L.A. either. Compare that to other guys over the course of their career, Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, and others, did not seem to manipulate outcomes quite as much. I think history ends up being a little kinder to them partially because of that, which brings me to the transfer portal, where I think a lot of quarterbacks are going to be dangerous of potentially making a mistake of thinking the grass is going to be greener somewhere else. That by trying to manipulate an outcome, they're actually going to put themselves in a worse position. Listen, say what you will about Jalen Hurts, but a lot of people didn't think he'd be on Alabama's roster in 2018. As it turns out, he let this kind of play out on its own. He leaves Alabama in a much better place than he was at the start of the 2018 season because he was a part of the the SEC championship win, and he's generally thought to be a really good soldier there in Tuscaloosa. I do think for a lot of these guys entering the transfer portal, there is going to be a lot of unhappiness on the other side of that portal appearance, and there's something to be said for not assuming that you can control outcomes and letting things kind of play out however they play out. It's obviously easy to say that when you're not the one in the midst of all this, but I think history, both personal and collective, shows us that outcomes can't necessarily be controlled.
No.
So
I don't think LeBron imagined missing the playoffs his first year in Los Angeles.
Cliff Payne reminds us that Aaron Rodgers sat for the bench a long time waiting on Brett Favre to retire, and he's going to obviously leave his football career now as another all-time great there in Packers history. So that is certainly seemingly a bygone era now. So that's kind of an obscure point to make at the end, but we're glad to have you as a part of our comment section here today on our RS Andrews School Down as a part of DawgNation Daily. Really fun chat, really fun conversation. We love this part of the day. Don't forget, if you've got some thoughts on Dooley Field, I know we talked about that a little earlier, when we post the podcast, and I'll do that here in just a couple of minutes once we're done, go into the world-famous DawgNation.com, the podcast post for today. Share your thoughts there. I don't care if you're for it or against it. That's not going to determine who wins. I'm just going to simply draw one of the names from one of the commenters in there. I'm trying to make an opportunity for the folks who don't get a chance to comment live to feel like they can have a chance to participate in all of this. So please check that out at the world-famous DawgNation.com, and I'll announce two Road to Atlanta t-shirt winners for tomorrow. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for another episode of DawgNation Daily. We'll talk to you then.